We're watching warfare shapeshift in front of our eyes. On the one hand, you have World War I. But on that same battlefield, as we know, is artificial intelligence, unmanned systems.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I am sitting down with retired four-star U.S. Admiral and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Jim Stavridis. We're going to look at some of the biggest security threats facing America as we head into a highly contentious presidential election, don't you think? And some of those threats coming from inside the House. But outside of the United States, there's plenty to keep the next commander-in-chief up at night. There's a grinding war in Ukraine still going on, a bloody conflict in Gaza still going on. And of course, there's China with one of the biggest unknowns in geopolitics today. What will Chinese President Xi Jinping do about Taiwan? But first, I've been thinking about something that New York Times national security correspondent David Sanger said about China's leader Xi Jinping on this show recently.
Xi has made it clear he plans to go solve the Taiwan problem while he is still in office.
So if you're Xi, how do you solve a problem like Taiwan? And has Xi's solution changed as he's watched Russia get bogged down in over 2 years of bloody and expensive military war in Ukraine? First, I should be clear about one thing. Even before Putin launched his special military operation, as he called it, in Ukraine, the chances of China invading Taiwan in the near term were close to zero. An all-out invasion of Taiwan would be a massive risk for China economically, militarily, and politically. Part of the reason, geography. Taiwan sits on the so-called first island chain, which includes U.S.-friendly nations like the Philippines and Japan. The bigger reason is technology. A big piece of the world's electronics, including phones, electric cars, rely on computer chips produced in Taiwan. Remarkably, one Taiwanese company, Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, TSMC, controls more than half of the global market. And while China is doing its best to ramp up domestic production of these chips, Beijing remains deeply dependent on TSMC for its own technology infrastructure. So not only would a Chinese invasion destroy TSMC at a time when it produces over half the world's chips, not to mention about 80 to 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, but the international reaction would be at least as severe as what Putin has faced. There would, however, be one big difference. Russia is a gas station, kind of big one. China's not. Moscow has managed to prop up a deeply sanctioned economy by exporting its own oil and natural gas supplies, mostly to former Soviet states and countries like Turkey, India, and, well, China. China, on the other hand, needs stability in the global markets. Their global economy is deeply dependent on access to other countries around the world. At a time when a bursting real estate bubble has kneecapped China's own economy, Beijing literally cannot afford to invade Taiwan. Now, make no mistake, I still think Sanger is right to say that Xi won't leave office without trying to, and I quote, solve Taiwan. But I think his strategy is going to be far more subtle and incremental than a military invasion. Taiwan's economy remains vastly more dependent on China than any other country, certainly including the US. Xi can use that. He'll squeeze Taiwan economically. He'll continue to force Taiwanese business leaders to integrate into the Chinese Communist Party as a price of entry into its markets. Xi can apply plenty of economic and political pressure on Taiwan without sending a single Chinese troop to the island. The final variable, of course, is time. Xi Jinping is 71 years old, a spring chicken by American political standards, no doubt. But he's probably looking at no more than another decade or so in power. So even an incremental solution to his Taiwan problem does need to happen in a matter of years, not decades. In the meantime, Taiwanese citizens and their Western allies will continue to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Here to talk about China, Russia, and the rest of the geopolitical threat landscape facing the United States, Admiral James Stravridis. Admiral Jim Stavridis, good to have you back on the show.
Great to be back with you.
There's so much to talk about. And
Do you
I mean,
think?
yeah, I mean, usually you and I go around the world, but I
Sure.
kind of feel, given what's been happening in the United States, maybe we should start here at home.
Sure.
Threat environment in the U.S. I mean, I remember hearing from the head of national intelligence, from the head of the CIA, the biggest threats to the United States right now are here. What does that mean to you?
Three things. One, domestic terrorism. We just saw an assassination attempt on the former president of the United States. So internal domestic terror acts. Number two, threat actors. Clearly, we've seen Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, back in July, talking about all systems blinking red. And he's talking about, for example, a very porous southern border with indications that malactors are moving people across.
From all over the world.
All over the world, from the Middle East, from Latin America,
from China.
and certainly from China, certainly from the stands. So there's a physical external component. And then thirdly, you and I have talked quite a bit over the years, cyber and cyber activity. I think that's distinct from the first two because it's not as attributable. And so here in particular, I'd be watching China and Russia, great powers who have real capability. So Ian, I think those are the three threat vectors we ought to be mindful of. And oh, by the way, you may not know this, there's an election in the United States this year.
I was going to ask you.
So that's going to amp up the tendency of bad actors to do things because they know the spotlight is here.
What have you seen in this election cycle? I mean, everyone is, of course, more unhinged this time around, but what have you seen specifically in the run-up to this election that gives you pause compared to previous U.S. elections?
Well, first, it's the I think, very dramatic fork in the road on certain international issues. I think the most obvious is climate. So you've had a Trump administration that pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord, and deregulates significantly. Then we have now had 4 years of a Biden administration doing the opposite. And so I think, Ian, we're going to see very dramatic fork in the road between a Trump presidency and a Harris presidency in climate. I think, secondly, you're going to see pretty dramatic differences in how the two sides approach China. I think a Harris administration will be mindful of the challenges of China, but look more for opportunities to cooperate where we can, confront where we must. With a Trump administration, I think we're in for a pretty rough ride with China. So as I watch foreign policy, kind of our wheelhouse, I worry about that bifurcation of U.S. foreign policy. It makes us appear erratic, unwieldy, whichever side you favor coming into power.
I mean, clearly the backdrop geopolitically to a challenging domestic U.S. threat environment is much more volatile and uncertain than any time that I've been watching politics. Maybe start with China. We know that Taiwan is an existential issue for Xi Jinping. Does that also make him much more cautious in the way he is willing to escalate, or a level of risk aversion around a new Taiwanese government that he really dislikes and mistrusts?
So I think this is a good example of where it's helpful to put yourselves in the shoes of the other actors. So let's put ourselves in Xi Jinping's shoes for a minute, because there's another word here. We talk about Taiwan. What else is Xi looking at? He's looking at Ukraine, and he's asking himself three things. On Ukraine, at the Olympics 2.5 years ago, his best friend forever, Vladimir Putin, whispered in his ear, you know, Xi, I'm going to take down that country. I'm going to sweep across it in 5 days. I'm going to grab that little knucklehead former comedian and throw him in Leforto prison for the rest of his life, or maybe I'll kill him. What happened? Well, they got stopped. So point one, President Xi is watching what happened in Ukraine and is asking himself, I wonder if my generals are as bad as those Russian generals appear to be. Putin's generals assured him they would conquer Ukraine. Of course, they have not. A lot of factors have gone into that. But that's uncertainty number one for Xi. His armed force, his Chinese military hasn't been in combat in a serious way since the Korean War. He doesn't have a general who's heard a shot fired in anger. For better or for worse, The American military is highly blooded.
Yeah.
So that's uncertainty number one, and he's watching Ukraine. Uncertainty number two, she says to himself, I wonder if those Taiwanese will fight like hell, the way that the Ukrainians have. He doesn't know. He's never been to Taiwan. I've been to Taiwan a fair amount. I think they'll fight. I think they'll fight hard. And that island is a resistance fighter's dream. It's wooded, mountainous. The Taiwanese have been tunneling it for decades. I think they'll fight and fight hard.
It's also an island, so it's amphibious.
And bang,
right?
as I always say, you know, there's a reason people built moats around castles in the Middle Ages. Taiwan is surrounded by the biggest, baddest moat on earth. It's 100 miles of really rough sea that I've sailed. So uncertainty number two is how hard will the resistance be? I think it'll be hard. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. But number three, would he incur big sanctions the way that Russia has? And, you know, I think President Xi probably wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror on that subject and says, my economy, it's too big to sanction, right? Yeah, it is pretty big economy, but could we hurt it badly with precision-guided sanctions, secondary sanctions? Yeah, it would crack the global economy. Let's hope we don't get there. But again, where we started this conversation, Ian, what's Xi's prime directive right now? He has to get his economy going. Attacking Taiwan doesn't get him there.
All of this is making you think that near term, at least, maybe near to medium term,
5 years,
the risks of confrontation with China are overstated.
Correct.
Yeah, and I mean, that's important because, you know, at the end of the day, I know you said that there's a difference, there's a fork in the road between a Harris presidency and Trump presidency. But I mean, I would argue that of all the places out there, China's the one that they've been most aligned on.
Yeah.
It's the easiest one to get like, you know, consensus in Congress on.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe we can dial down the temperature a little bit, given the nature of the Chinese economy.
I will part company with you with one word, which is tariff. The Trump team, at least thus far, has talked consistently.
They talk big.
Massive tariff. The Harris team is much more amenable to finding a better path. I think that's where the big difference is between them. And I agree with you geopolitically. I think both sides, no one's looking for a war here.
So I want to pivot. You've written a lot recently, including a very fun speculative novel, 2054, about where technology is going and how that changes national security for the United States. And most of this book's set in the United States, this one as opposed to the last one in Asia, which is a lot of fun. I want to talk, though, about how technology is changing fighting in the United States.
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit about not 2054, but the next, let's say, administration, the next 4 years.
Sure.
How is warfighting going to change? How is America's national security posture and vulnerabilities going to change?
Let's start with Ukraine. We're watching warfare shape-shift in front of our eyes. On the one hand, you have World War I. You have trenches, blood, guts, hand-to-hand fighting, waves of troops massacred, static everything. It's World War I. And what's the coin of the realm? Artillery, shells. Thousands of them. So that's the World War I piece. But on that same battlefield, as we know, is artificial intelligence, unmanned systems. The Russian Black Sea Fleet started with 60 ships, of which almost half are sunk or badly damaged.
Which is crazy, because Ukraine doesn't have a navy.
You stole my punchline.
Oh, was that your line?
Yeah, sure. Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. They did it all with unmanned vehicles, exquisite intelligence. And what was the first ship they sank? The flagship.
The biggest one.
The flagship.
Moskva.
Moskva took it down with 400 sailors, a remarkable feat of arms. So you've got these competing visions in front of you. How do we think about it? Here's our problem so often in geopolitics and life. We want to think of everything as an on and off switch. Everything's black and white. It's very simple. So one could say, oh yeah, the U.S. military needs to absolutely do unmanned and special forces and cyber and get rid of all those expensive platforms. That's not the right image. It's not an on and off switch. It's a rheostat. You dial it in. And so over the next 4 years, I think quite significantly, using the lessons of Ukraine, you're going to see the dial of that rheostat move, less spending on those big conventional platforms, more spending. And the good news is a lot of it's less expensive on cyber, on unmanned, on space, on lightweight maritime systems, on a U.S. Marine Corps. And what you need to think about in this context is a new triad that's emerging. We think of triad as the strategic triad, the nuclear. This is the new triad of warfare. It's unmanned systems. And people think, oh, drones. No, it's much bigger than that. It's unmanned. That's satellites. That's long dwell surveillance. It's Reaper Predator attack drones.
Submarines.
It all the way to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
That tranche of unmanned is one leg of this new triad. The next leg is cyber and artificial intelligence. We can dive in deeper on that. And the third leg of the triad are special forces. And I want to make a point. Special forces we tend to think of as Rambo and Navy SEALs putting red dots on people's foreheads. That's part of it. But special forces, to me, are elite, exquisitely trained humans doing very difficult one-off tasks. So that can be a SEAL, it can be a Marine Raider, it can also be a cyber expert, it can be a drone pilot, it can be an artificial intelligence engineer, those kind of special forces. We are going to need less of these huge standing armies, which are incredibly expensive. By far the most expensive thing in the U.S. Armed Forces are personnel. We are not going to need a 1 million person army to contend with China, but we are going to need that new triad of warfare.
In the next 5 years, is it more or less likely that the United States, as a comparative power projection to other adversaries in the world, does it get comparatively stronger or weaker, and why?
I think we will continue to be the preeminent nation at projecting power. And the reason is because we've invested in it enormously. Even if you look at China, which would be the other nation that is consciously developing the ability to
including
do
major nuclear capabilities.
Nuclear capability, satellite systems, building bases. China today has, you probably know this, one base. It's in Djibouti. Correct. There are hundreds of U.S. bases all around the world. So I think the U.S. will continue to be preeminent. China will make a play to do it. Russia, the lights are going to go out, I think, because of Putin's folly in Ukraine. And I don't see another contending power. I don't see the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Venezuelans, the Cubans, the usual list of malactors.
But asymmetrical warfare from randos is going way up.
Correct. That's what you need to worry about. Back where we started this conversation, in particular, it's small group acts of terrorism. It's the ability to use weapons of mass disruption as well as weapons of mass destruction. And here cyber continues to be very dangerous.
Admiral James Stravridis, thanks again for joining the show.
What a pleasure, Ian.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you've seen, or even if you don't, but you're looking to invade Taiwan yourself, we can help. Why don't you take a minute to sign up for our most excellent morning newsletter called GZERO Daily.